My girlfriend Amanda and I bought our first house together about 4 months back. We'd been saving for years and finally had enough for a down payment on something decent. We ended up settling on a place just outside Tacoma, Washington. Both of us work remotely now, so location wasn't really an issue, and we figured the extra space would be good for us. Amanda does graphic design, and I work in software development, so we were excited about having separate office spaces. We also have a tabby cat named Ringo, who seemed to adjust to the new place pretty quickly. The house itself was older, probably built sometime in the 70s, but it had been updated enough that we didn't think there would be too many issues. The inspection came back mostly clean aside from some minor stuff that we figured we could deal with over time. We'd been living there for maybe 2 months when I started noticing a weird smell coming from the guest bedroom. At first I thought maybe Ringo had gotten sick in there or something, but after checking around I couldn't find anything obvious. The smell would come and go, but it was definitely getting worse. I'm not exactly handy when it comes to home repair stuff. Growing up, my dad handled all that kind of thing, and I just never learned. Amanda is even less equipped to deal with it than I am. After the smell persisted for about a week, I finally broke down and called a general contractor to come take a look. I explained the situation, and he said it could be anything from mold to a dead animal in the walls to a plumbing issue. None of those options sounded great tea. The contractor came by on a Tuesday afternoon. His name was Mike, and he seemed like he knew what he was doing. He spent about 20 minutes poking around the guest bedroom before telling me he wanted to check the crawl space underneath the house. I didn't even know we had a crawl space. He pointed out the small access panel in the hallway closet that I just assumed was for storage or something. To be honest, I hadn't really explored every detail of the house yet since we'd been so busy with work. Mike grabbed a flashlight and squeezed himself through the panel. I waited in the hallway, listening to him shuffle around down there. After maybe 10 minutes, he called up to me and said I should probably come take a look at something. The way he said it made my stomach drop. I'm not great with tight spaces, but I forced myself through the opening and crawled over to where his flashlight was pointing. The crawl space was bigger than I expected, maybe 3 feet high, and it ran underneath most of the house. Mike was crouched near what looked like a modified section of the foundation. Someone had clearly done work down there, but it wasn't any kind of repair job. There was a small enclosed area, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, with plywood walls that had been installed deliberately. Inside this makeshift room were several plastic storage bins. Mike told me this wasn't normal, and I should probably see what was in those bins before we went any further. I pulled the first one open, and immediately wished I hadn't. Inside were dozens of photographs. All of them were of the same woman, taken from a distance with what must have been a zoom lens. Some showed her in her backyard. Others showed her through windows. There were photos of her getting her mail, walking her dog, sitting on her porch. My hands started shaking as I rifled through them. The second bin had notebooks. I opened one and saw pages of handwritten notes documenting her daily routine, what time she left for work, what time she came home, what kind of car she drove. There were detailed observations about her habits, her visitors, everything. The handwriting was meticulous and unsettling. The third bin had more of the same, including printed maps with routes marked, and what looked like different vantage points highlighted. I felt sick. Mike and I both got out of the crawl space as quickly as we could. Once we were back in the hallway, he told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to call the police immediately. He said he'd seen some weird things in his years doing this work, but nothing like that. I agreed completely. Before calling the police, though, I did something probably stupid. I wanted to know who the previous owner was, and why they'd left all this behind. Amanda and I had bought the house from an older guy named Richard something. I couldn't remember his last name off the top of my head, but I found it in our paperwork. Richard Brennan. Our realtor had mentioned he was selling because he was moving out of state for a job opportunity. I tried looking him up online but couldn't find much. I did manage to get a phone number through our realtor, who seemed confused about why I needed to contact him, but gave it to me anyway. When I called, a woman answered. I asked if Richard was available, and she hesitated before saying he wasn't home. I explained that we'd found something concerning in the crawl space and needed to speak with him about it. She got quiet for a long time before asking what we'd found. I told her about the photographs and notebooks. She hung up immediately. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong. I called the police, and they sent 2 officers over within the hour. They went down into the crawl space themselves and brought up all 3 bins. They asked me a lot of questions about the previous owner and whether I'd had any contact with him since moving in. I told them about the phone call and how the woman had hung up on me. They took down all the information and said they'd look into it. The officers also suggested I figure out who the woman in the photographs was, since she might be in danger, or at least deserved to know what had been happening. One of them thought she might be a neighbor based on the angles of some of the photos. That thought made me deeply uncomfortable. The idea that someone living nearby had been the target of this obsession was disturbing on multiple levels. Over the next few days, the police did their investigation. They confirmed that Richard Brennan had moved out of state, but they were working on locating him. They also identified the woman in the photos. She lived 4 houses down from us. Her name was Lisa, and apparently she had no idea any of this had been going on. The police informed her, and she was understandably horrified. Things got worse about a week after the initial discovery. Amanda and I were both working from home when we heard someone trying to open our back door. Ringo started hissing and ran under the couch. I went to check and saw a man standing on our back porch, jiggling the door handle. When he saw me through the window, he didn't run. He just stared at me for a few seconds before walking away calmly, like he had every right to be there. I called the police immediately and gave them a description. They arrived quickly, but the guy was long gone. Based on my description and some old DMV records, they were pretty sure it was Richard Brennan. Apparently, he'd driven back into town, though they weren't sure why. Their best guess was that he wanted to retrieve his bins and didn't expect anyone to have found them. The police increased patrols in our neighborhood and told both us and Lisa to be vigilant. That was 5 days ago. I never thought I'd be a homeowner before 30, but here we are. My wife Rebecca and I have been together since college, about 8 years now, and we finally tied the knot last summer. We just closed on our first house 3 weeks ago in a suburb outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm not going to say exactly which town for privacy reasons, but it's one of those neighborhoods that was built maybe 10 or 15 years ago, with cookie-cutter houses and decent-sized yards. We're both in our early 30s, and this felt like the right time to stop throwing money away on rent. I work in IT and Rebecca's a dental hygienist, so our schedules line up pretty well. I'm usually home by 5:30, and she gets back around 6 most days. The first week in the house was exactly what you'd expect. Exhausting, but exciting. We spent every evening after work unpacking boxes and trying to figure out where everything should go. The previous owners had left the place in good condition, and there weren't any obvious problems with the house itself. We felt like we got a solid deal on it, honestly. The garage was one of the main selling points for me, since I've always wanted space to work on projects and store tools properly. It wasn't until about 9 days after we moved in that something strange happened. I woke up one morning, maybe around 6:15 to get ready for work, and noticed through the kitchen window that our garage door was wide open. I went out to the garage and looked around, but nothing seemed out of place or missing. I figured I must have forgotten to close it the night before, even though I was pretty sure I'd hit the button. Rebecca said she hadn't opened it. I felt like an idiot and just chalked it up to being distracted with the move. I closed it and went about my day. 2 nights later, the same thing happened. I woke up early to use the bathroom and happened to glance out the front window. The garage door was open again. This time I knew for a fact I'd closed it, because I specifically remembered doing it before we went to bed. I went downstairs and checked the garage thoroughly. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There were muddy footprints on the concrete floor that definitely weren't there before. They weren't mine and they weren't Rebecca's. Someone had been in our garage. I woke Rebecca up and showed her. She was immediately freaked out and wanted to call the police right away, but I told her to hold on a second. Nothing appeared to be stolen, and I didn't want to look paranoid by calling the cops over an open garage door. Looking back, I should have listened to her. Instead, I checked to make sure our cars were locked, and that the door leading from the garage into the house was locked, which it was. I told myself maybe it was just some kid messing around, or someone who thought the house was still vacant. The next day I changed the garage door opener code. The previous owners had left us their old remotes, and I figured maybe someone else had one too. A neighbor they'd given a spare to or something. Changing the code seemed like the obvious solution. I also made a point to test the door multiple times to make sure it was actually closing all the way, and that there wasn't some mechanical issue causing it to open on its own. For about 4 days, everything seemed fine. We started to relax a little bit. I convinced myself that changing the code had solved the problem. Then, this past Monday night, I got home from work and went into the garage to grab something from my toolbox. I noticed immediately that my tools had been moved around. I'm the type of person who keeps things organized in a specific way, and several of my wrenches and screwdrivers were in different spots than where I'd left them. Some of my smaller tools were missing entirely. I called Rebecca in and asked if she'd been looking for anything in my toolbox, and she said no. That's when I decided we needed a camera. I drove to Best Buy that same evening and bought one of those motion-activated security cameras you can monitor from your phone. I set it up in the garage pointing at the door, and the area where I kept my tools. I didn't tell Rebecca exactly what I was doing, because I didn't want her to worry more than she already was. But I had this sinking feeling that someone was coming into our garage regularly, and I needed proof. I got my proof 2 nights ago. At 2:47 in the morning, my phone went off with a motion alert from the camera. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man in our garage. He looked maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans, and he was going through the storage bins we'd stacked against the wall. I watched him for maybe 10 seconds before I jumped out of bed and yelled at Rebecca to call 911. I grabbed the baseball bat from the closet and ran downstairs, turning on every light in the house as I went. By the time I got to the garage door and threw it open, he was gone. The garage door was closing, which meant he'd hit the button on his way out. I ran outside into the driveway, but I didn't see anyone. Rebecca was on the phone with the police, and I went back inside to wait with her. The cops showed up maybe 15 minutes later, and I showed them the footage from the camera. They took a report and said they'd increase patrols in the area. But one of the officers told me point blank that unless they caught the guy in the act, there wasn't much they could do. I changed the garage door code again that same night, and we started parking both cars in the driveway instead of inside. We figured if he couldn't get into the garage easily, he'd give up and move on. We were wrong about that. Last night, Rebecca woke me up at around 3:20 in the morning, whispering my name. She was terrified. She said she heard a noise from upstairs, from one of the spare bedrooms we were using for storage. I listened, and I heard it too. Footsteps above us. Our bedroom is on the first floor, and there shouldn't have been anyone upstairs. I told her to lock the bedroom door and call the police while I went to check. I know that sounds stupid, and I'm sure everyone reading this is thinking I'm an idiot for not just waiting for the cops, but I was so angry at this point that I wasn't thinking straight. This was my house, and someone was inside it. I grabbed the bat again and slowly went upstairs. When I got to the spare bedroom, I pushed the door open and turned on the light. The window was wide open, and the screen had been pried off from the outside. There was a ladder leaning against the house that I'd left in the backyard. He'd used my own ladder to break in. But here's the part that really messed me up. In the corner of the room, behind some boxes, he'd made this little area with a blanket and a pillow. There were empty water bottles and food wrappers. On top of one of the boxes was a framed photo of Rebecca and me from our wedding. He'd taken it from downstairs. Next to it was one of Rebecca's sweaters that had gone missing from the laundry room last week. The police came again, and this time they seemed to take it a lot more seriously. They took the ladder and the items as evidence and dusted for prints. They said based on the camera footage and the break-in, they'd be actively looking for this guy. One officer suggested we might want to stay somewhere else for a few days until they figured out who he was. We've been at Rebecca's parents' house for the past 2 nights. I installed cameras on every side of our house, and we had a security system put in yesterday. The police called this morning and said they think they identified the guy from the garage footage. Apparently, he's someone who used to do yard work for the previous owners, and he might have gotten a garage remote from them at some point. They're looking for him now. I honestly don't know when we're going to feel safe enough to go back home. This was supposed to be our dream house, the place where we'd start our life together. And now I can't stop thinking about how many times this guy was inside while we were sleeping. We're talking about selling it. I never imagined something like this could happen. When my wife and I closed on our house last September, it felt like we'd finally made it. After 6 years of renting apartments with paper-thin walls and neighbors who played bass-heavy music until 2 a.m., we had our own place. A 3-bedroom colonial on Millbrook Lane in a quiet suburb, about 40 minutes outside the city. The neighborhood was established but not old, most homes built in the early 2000s. Mature trees lined the streets. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalks. It was exactly what we wanted. The day we moved in, 2 different neighbors came over to introduce themselves. The Hendersons from the left brought a bottle of wine. The older couple from the right, the Castellanos, brought a dish of homemade lasagna. Everyone was warm and welcoming. I remember thinking we'd made the right choice. Our house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, which was a selling point for us. Less traffic, more privacy. But it also means we're positioned in a way where the house directly behind us, separated by both our backyard and a thin strip of woods, maybe 30 feet deep, has a clear sightline to our property. You can see their second-floor windows from our back deck if you look through the bare patches in the trees. For the first week or so after moving in, I didn't pay much attention to that house. I was too busy unpacking boxes, assembling furniture, and figuring out which circuit breaker controlled which outlet. But I started noticing something around day 10. I'd be in the backyard, usually in the late afternoon after work, either grilling or just sitting on the deck decompressing, and I'd get this feeling, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck when someone's watching you. The first few times I brushed it off. New environment, new sounds, new everything. Of course I'd feel a little on edge. But then I started looking. Through the trees, in one of the second-floor windows of the house behind us, there was a figure, a man, standing motionless at the window, just watching. The first time I saw him clearly, he was wearing what looked like a dark hoodie, maybe navy or black. I couldn't make out his face at that distance, but I could tell his head was angled toward my yard. We made eye contact, or at least it felt like we did. I looked away first. When I glanced back maybe 30 seconds later, he was still there. I went inside and didn't come back out that evening. I told my wife about it that night. She said he was probably just looking outside, maybe at the trees or the birds. People stand at windows all the time. I wanted to believe that. The next day I was mowing the lawn. Halfway through, I looked up at that window again. He was there, same position, same stillness. This time I didn't look away immediately. I kept mowing, glancing up every few passes. He didn't move for the entire 20 minutes it took me to finish. After that, it became a pattern. Not every day, but most days. If I was outside, there was a good chance he was at that window. I started keeping track mentally. My wife saw him once too. She admitted it was a little strange, but she said maybe he was just an odd guy. Some people are like that. I considered walking over there and introducing myself. That's what normal neighbors do, right? But something about the way he watched made me hesitant. It wasn't casual, it was deliberate. And the thought of knocking on his door and having him answer, having to look at his face up close after all those hours of him staring, made my stomach turn. About 3 weeks after we moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night to a sound I couldn't immediately identify. It was maybe 2 or 3 a.m. My wife was asleep next to me. I lay there in the dark, listening. Footsteps. On our back deck. They were slow, measured, like someone was walking carefully, trying not to make noise but not quite succeeding. The wood on our deck is older and creaks in certain spots. I heard each creak distinctly. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and moved to the window that overlooks the backyard. I couldn't see the deck from that angle. It's directly below the bedroom, but I could see the yard and the strip of woods, and beyond that, the house. His window was dark. For the first time since I'd started watching, there was no figure standing there. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard our back door handle jiggle. Someone was testing it, seeing if it was locked. It was locked. I always lock it. The jiggling stopped. More footsteps on the deck, then silence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the hallway with a baseball bat, listening to every creak and groan of the house settling. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the property. On the deck, near the back door, I found a partial footprint in the morning dew. A man's shoe, maybe size 10 or 11. I took a picture of it with my phone. I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. An officer came out that afternoon. I told him everything. The man in the window, the footsteps, the door handle. He took notes and said he'd go knock on the door of the house behind us. When he came back about 25 minutes later, he told me no one answered. He said he'd checked with the county and the house was currently listed as vacant. The previous owners had moved out 4 months ago, and it hadn't sold yet. No one was supposed to be living there. I know what I saw. I saw someone in that window dozens of times. I heard someone on my deck. Someone tried my door handle. The officer recommended I install cameras, which I did that same week. Motion-activated floodlights, too. I also started leaving the back porch light on all night. It's been about 2 months now. I haven't seen the figure in the window since I filed the report. No more footsteps on the deck. The cameras haven't captured anything unusual, but I still look. Every time I'm in the backyard, I look up at that second-floor window. Most of the time, it's empty. Just dark glass reflecting the trees. Most of the time. Last week, just before sunset, I was taking out the recycling. I glanced up out of habit. He was there. Same window. Same stillness. Same angle, like he was looking directly at me. I went inside and haven't used the backyard since. I don't know who he is, why he's watching, or what he wants. I don't know if he's homeless, mentally ill, dangerous, or all three. What I do know is that I bought this house to feel safe, to finally have something that was ours. Now I don't even feel comfortable in my own backyard.